If you're in SaaS sales and you're looking for your next role, the jobs we talk about in this episode, including upcoming roles Greg is building towards, will be posted on salesacademy.com/jobs. I personally pre-vet applicants and send the best straight to the hiring leader. Now let's get into it. Welcome to Top Sales Jobs in SaaS, the podcast where founders, CROs, and VPs of sales share how they're building teams and the sales roles they're hiring for now and in the coming quarters. I'm Sean Anderson. I help SaaS companies build and scale high-performing sales teams by installing AI-enabled recruiting and onboarding systems. Today, I'm joined by Greg Swift, Chief Revenue Officer at Toon Boom Animation. If you've watched animated TV, movies, or games in the last few decades, you've seen Toon Boom's tools in action. They're the global standard for 2D animation, that is, and storyboarding software used by studios in over 100 countries. Before Toon Boom, Greg spent almost 3 years as the CRO at Docebo, a leading learning platform. And before that, he and I worked together in the SAP ecosystem when I was running mid-market sales, and he was VP of sales at Contacts and SAP VAR. Greg, great to have you here.
Hey, Sean, always good to connect, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Happy New Year if it's not too late to say that.
Same to you.
First off, for people who don't live in the animation world, how do you describe what Toon Boom does and who you sell to?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you and I have discussed, I'm 75 days in, so I do not profess to be an animation expert, but we've got 3 key platforms. And, the first is around Storyboard Pro, which is basically the pipeline and how you manage the production around animation. The second is Harmony, which is the actual tool that allows you to create animation. And the third is Producer, which is a higher level overview tool that is used at the producer level, just as it sounds. So typically, it's a real cross-section of customers. On the commercial side, it's what you'd expect, the networks, the large networks, which I won't name, but I think everyone that listens would certainly know the organizations, into the studios, which do a lot of the actual animation work for the networks, and then also down to individuals that are hobbyists or students that want to learn animation, or are artisans, if you would. And then on the other side of our business is education. So both K-12, which is a significant market for us to get students exposed to animation so that either they can be job ready when they graduate from grade 12, or they can move on to post-secondary that have animation programs. And then higher education organizations that teach animation. Again, really our platform is the gold standard. So they want to teach their students what is most important in the industry, and therefore we're fortunate that we're partnered with most of the significant organizations globally that teach animation.
Very cool. So really the leader in the space, and the company is headquartered out of Montreal. I think kind of a hotbed for this type of work and technology. Sounds like the business is pretty international as well. You were just on a trip to Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you said, it's like most ecosystems. It's pretty integrated. So you'll have a network, typically out of Hollywood, that will be running an episode or a program, and they'll be leveraging animation organizations, studios in Asia, in Europe, Africa, anywhere, quite frankly, in the globe, North America, that actually do the animation work. So yeah, I was over in the UK and Ireland. We've got a significant footprint there. And then the next couple of months, I'll be in Asia, back to Europe, and of course the US, which is one of our significant markets, and also visiting studios and customers here in Canada.
Very cool. So you'll be racking up the miles.
Yeah. Yes. Continuing to build the Aeroplan super elite status.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your career and your journey up to this point. You stepped into this role as CRO. Could you maybe walk us through the key chapters in your career? You started sort of in the PeopleSoft and Oracle world, and then transitioned over to SAP. and then got into the startup and scale up world with Docebo and now Toon Boom. What are the big milestones for you?
Yeah, I think, 30 years in, I'll try and keep it fairly succinct. But, to your point, Sean, I kind of divide it into thirds. And the first third, which I certainly don't forget, because I think a lot of what you talk about is leadership, is my time in the military, where I became an airborne officer, going through university. And that taught me, a lot about leadership, quite frankly. And the difference, really between positional power, in the military, you wear it on your shoulder. It's more evident than any other organization, and personal power, and what really is most important, and how do you influence and how do you lead effectively? So that was kind of the first chapter. And I think really where I learned the fundamentals of leadership, and, how to, set the mission, the vision, and then make sure that you have put together a plan and, can get your team rallied around it and bought in and want to take the hill, if you would. Second, third of my career, as you mentioned, was at large enterprise organizations. I was fortunate to come into Xerox, which at the time was kind of the blue chip of sales organizations, learn the fundamentals, the elevator pitch, how to demo, a lot of door knocking. So really the blocking and tackling, if you would. And then, I guess about over 25 years ago now, got into technology. So with some large enterprise organizations like PTC, Parametric Technology Corporation, as you mentioned, PeopleSoft, Oracle, and SAP, where I was fortunate to get into leadership fairly early in my career and have progressive leadership roles. At Oracle, I ran Eastern Canada out of Montreal on the consulting sales side, which was a really interesting position. And then I moved back into the license side with SAP, where I ran mid-market initially and then enterprise for Ontario. So again, really, I think I look at those two roles as doing my MBA, quite frankly. And then to your point, phase 3 was really getting into the growth and scale up companies. So I had my own startup scale up where I learned a lot about how to build an organization, what to do, what not to do, et cetera. So I think, again, a good rounding. And then, really helped companies move from seed or conception through to, either friends and family raise or A series, et cetera. So it's that's kind of been, and then I stepped back into more of the growth companies with Docebo and now at Toon Boom.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, a lot of great leaders have come from the military. A lot of great sellers have come from Xerox and Canon, and have moved into software. I've had made a lot of great hires over time from that world, and kind of like a nice balance between working for bigger companies and then going out and maybe taking some of the system lessons from those bigger companies, but figuring it out in a smaller space and learning how to scale those companies, and those lessons that you learn from SAP and Xerox and whatnot certainly help with that.
Well, working at a Xerox agency, Sean, where my first role was 100% commission, and I had a wife and child at the time and responsibilities. You learn to hunt more effectively, shall we say. You knock on a lot of doors, and I think it was great to learn the fundamentals, at the large enterprise organizations, really around process governance and acumen and hygiene. So, and I think, like you said, you can take the best of that world and you can meld that into the growth companies, remove the administrivia, obviously, but have that level of professional approach, if you would, because you're typically selling to large organizations.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, in the Xerox world, like, they invest a ton of money into training and education. And I think maybe there's some parallels with your military experience, like the discipline that you learn in that Xerox environment is really key. Like, I found people that I've hired from that environment, their discipline is really unparalleled, in part because, like, you have to be, like, you're 100% commission, 100% rip. There's no room. You have to produce, and to produce, you've got to be disciplined every day with your cold calling, your door knocking, all that stuff.
Absolutely. And I mean, it was before the days of SDRs, et cetera. I mean, you did your own business development. Of course, you had, a marketing or advertising engine. But yeah, it was great to learn the fundamentals, but like you said, really the work ethic, right? I think, which is what drives, it works smarter, of course, but you have to work hard. I mean, I think that's the key to success in revenue and sales.
100%. In terms of Toon Boom, what specifically about Toon Boom and this CRO role made you say yes after Docebo?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I think if you look at, what are your differentiators and what's your value proposition? Mine is, I've been fairly dynamic. I've worked at some of the largest software companies. I've worked at, like I said, startup, scale up, ERP, asset management, dental, legal, so I've been fairly malleable as far as learning new industries, et cetera. And I mean, who doesn't like animation? It's an interesting space, very different than anything I'd done in the past. But I think the biggest piece is the company was bought about just over a year and a half ago by private equity, by IMC Integrated Media Corporation, which is owned by TPG, which have got 250 billion, I think, under management. So, and they bought the company to grow it, and that was the exciting piece for me. I had an opportunity through the interview process to meet the majority. I think pretty much everyone on the board. I was really excited by the vision, by, what they're looking to drive in the next 3 or 4 years as they really look to, move from being the gold star currently, but how do we broaden that? How do we increase value to our customers, most importantly, and therefore wallet share, right? And then, yeah, I mean, if our CEO watches this, I'm sure it'll sound like it's round nosing, but he's a great individual. I want to work with someone that I can learn from. He's been in this space a long time and very balanced and intelligent. So, I think those are the key ingredients that made me want to jump in and see if we can grow the organization.
Yeah, I mean, that's always key. I mean, outside the opportunity and the vehicle itself, you got, a good product that you can be proud to represent, be excited about, big key in any role, but especially in a CR role is, who are you going to be working with? Who's your CEO?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, Sean. We've all come into companies, and if you've got product issues, those are significant and they're very difficult, and it's a long tail on trying to get those solved. If you've got some things, everything's working fairly well, but you need to make some improvements, namely on the revenue side, especially in a more nimble organization like Toon Boom. Those are changes that you can make, and you can drive impact within year. Our fiscal ends the end of August, so we're in Q2 now, and we're making some changes that will impact and move the needle in our FY26, and then certainly looking at mid to long-term planning now on how do we truly grow and scale as we get into FY27 and beyond.
For sure. So you've been in role for about 75 days or so still pretty fresh. What were the first few things you wanted to get a feel for in terms of sales, go to market, and just the overall, revenue engine? It sounds like you've done a fair bit of, traveling to meet with customers. You've probably spent a fair bit of time with the team as well. What were the things that you were looking to really get a handle on in your first, 90 days or so?
Yeah, I think, first off was learning about the industry, right? It really, again, comes back to the fundamentals. I didn't know much about the animation industry. So learning about the industry itself, how animation is produced, the ecosystem globally, et cetera. And then where Toon Boom plays into the industry, how we position, where we win, where we're most effective, learning about the competitive landscape. So really kind of looking at the macro, that was the first 30 days. I think really I looked at it, the first 30 was kind of learn, the second was analyze or the second 30 days was analyze, and then getting into the 60 to 90 day period is really now looking at planning and, taking those learnings that I've had. And I think, as you said, I mean, it's a matter of getting out, understanding the organization, understanding the individuals in the organization, talking to customers, talking to prospects. So really trying to get a, 360 view of how we go to market and looking across, the customer life cycle from how do we acquire, targets in marketing and business development? How do we win business? And then, of course, most importantly, how to retain, minimize churn, and, what's our customer experience look like? So really looked at kind of the fundamentals across the full revenue cycle and, where we're doing well and perhaps identifying some areas that we need to make some changes in.
Yeah, very cool. And as you started to get under the hood, anything that sort of, stood out to you in terms of how the team is already operating, or maybe some surprises along the way, or things that are maybe you're just like, you didn't know about and it was cool to learn about?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I think every company and every individual, we all talk about how unique we are. And I always say if I had a dollar for certainly every company that told me how unique they were, I'd be long ago retired. But I think one of the attributes about this organization, this industry that is unique is, we've been around for about 30 years, and we've got a fair number of folks in the company that have been around 20 to 30 years in the revenue organization. And a lot of even the ICs, the management, et cetera, have been around 10 to 20 years. The CRO that I replaced had been with the organization more than 20 years. I'm used to average CRO tenure in SaaS is 18 to 36 months, I think. So you're typically replacing someone with 24 months of experience versus 24 years. So I think the tenure and really the passion in the industry, that's the amazing thing is, I talk to folks in the revenue organization or across the company that have been with the company for 10 to 20 plus years, and they're so excited. They're not jaded, they're not negative. A lot of the things that you may typically see, like everyone is so passionate about what we do, animation, as an art form, and really how can we continue to make a significant impact. So that's been a real positive. I think, one of the things that we'll dig into a little bit, I'm sure, is, one of the areas that I need to evolve is net new target, customer target acquisition and obtainment. I mean, like a lot of organizations, especially, you can imagine during the pandemic when live, they were not doing any live productions, during the shutdown. So animation literally, spiked. I mean, like never seen it before, because you could still do animation because it was being generated remotely. So of course, during the pandemic years, not that we need to talk about those too much, but saw a significant spike in the business. And then like a lot of organizations, we've seen that, tail off, shall we say, the last couple of years. So how do we get that momentum back, and how do we build on the net new side of the organization is really what I'm focused on as I look at, balance of year and then certainly into FY27 and beyond.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I saw some similarities when I was at Book for Time. Like when I came into Book for Time, company hadn't been around 30 years, but there had been people there that had been there for over 10 years. It's always nice to kind of step into a role when you're surrounded by people who, really know the product inside out, who know the customers, who understand the industry, especially if you're coming outside. For me, it was the spa wellness industry. Really didn't know much about it. It was nice to be able to kind of lean on them as a starting point to just accelerate and get up to speed quickly. And we saw the same thing at Book for Time with COVID. It was challenging. It was kind of scary because a lot of hotels were shut down, travel was shut down significantly. But the silver lining was it accelerated the move to cloud technologies from on-premise technologies. So it helped for sure. Coming out of COVID, there was sort of the revenge travel that happened. People were traveling like crazy after being stuck at home for pretty much a couple years, depending on where you were living. And we saw a nice bump. And that was the challenge, was to keep that momentum going. Luckily, we were able to do it and have a nice exit. But yeah, you're never sure if like you have that nice tailwind. You want to keep that going.
Yeah, I think, as you said, I think one of the unique attributes again is, and we often overuse the vernacular, but is the trusted advisor. And I've seen it. I've been out on the, calls either virtually or in person with the team. And I mean, when you've been in the industry for 10, 15 years, and like I said, some folks more than that, you're helping, I've watched where we're helping networks or studios connect the dots, make introductions, educate on the market, what we're seeing, the trends and where things are going. So really impressive, quite frankly. And yeah, like you said, a great learning for me for sure.
Very cool. So like looking at the next, 12 months or so, where do you think you'll be spending most of your energy?
As I mentioned, really on driving net new. and creating that engine.
Yeah.
Having to look at what are the levers that we can pull. Some of the markets that we're in are fairly saturated. Some of them are very dependent on what we call green lights, where projects are either green lit and hey, then they're going to move forward with the animation and the creation and they're going to need our tools. So some portions of our industry are very difficult to influence and impact, quite frankly. And like I said, we're kind of the gold standard. So there's not a lot of room for growth. So now it's finding new markets. Is it new geos, new routes to market? As I'd mentioned a few years ago, started to stand up the education segment, which is not as cyclical, obviously, as the production schedule, shall we say. It's something that, they need to teach year in, year out. So, and then, there's different levels of technology in animation in different geographies globally. So some are, leverage tools like ours effectively, and others are still hand drawing, believe it or not. Like it's,
Amazing.
it's been an eye opener for me, Sean. When you talk about AI and how progressive so many areas of technology are now, some of it is, again, protection around artists and IP, which I fully respect because it is an art form. And, so many of these folks are proud, but it's how can we leverage? And that's one of the things we're looking at. We, like every organization, we've adopted AI into our platform. We're going to continue to focus and build that out. But how do we leverage AI to reduce, redundant tasks or non-value add tasks, but making sure on the flip side that we protect artists and IP and kind of, the industry, the way the industry has worked for, hundreds of years, quite frankly. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but 99% of my focus is on how do we grow the business, namely through expansion and net new acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, that's always key. Like that was my experience at Book for Time. It got to a point where, especially within North America, within the larger hospitality brands, our market shares were getting to be pretty high. We had most of the big brands. So that meant, really growth came from international expansion, getting into new markets, looking at, adding new products to kind of get into kind of like what you're looking at doing, adjacent verticals within hospitality. Looks like you're looking to do the same thing. Very cool.
Yeah, that's the exciting part, right? It's always fun to be able to come in and have an outside purview in an organization that is, obviously they've changed go-to-market and continue to evolve and be very successful, but how can you provide an outside perspective, with your experience and identify, again, the new markets, new geos, et cetera, where you can actually go out and build and execute.
Very cool. Wanted to transition maybe a little bit and talk about some of the lessons that you learned from your experience at Docebo that you're kind of porting over and taking over to Toon Boom. You saw some serious growth there. What were, the non-negotiables you used when hiring and building that team out?
Yeah, it's all public knowledge, but I think when I joined in 22, I think we were about 143 million. And then I think when I left, we were about 219 million. So we saw a fairly expansive growth. And I think they probably finished the last fiscal around 250 million is my understanding. I think if you look at non-negotiables, Sean, across revenue, the first to me is always work ethic. You can, folks can have the right profile, they can have the right skills, attributes, experience, but you can't instill work ethic. People are either going to work hard, they're going to do what they need to do to be successful in their role and make others around them successful, or they're not. So, that's what I always look for. And also, culture. I think culture is extremely important. I guess as folks on my team will know, I was talking about growing up in a town of 250 folks in a family business, and business is personal to me. So, you can get folks that are successful that come in with egos and create a wake. And I don't really have a lot of time or bandwidth for that. I want folks that are good people, as I always quip, right? That have all the right skills, attributes, work ethic, but want to come in and work in a team setting. As we know, sales can be an individual sport, but really it is a team sport, and we all need to pull together and work together, right? So I think those are the key fundamentals. And the other piece for me, when you look at the broader revenue, outside of just sales, is customer first. And folks, to me, when you sell something, Number one, as I say now with SaaS, it is unique because you're selling year after year. Yeah, you might have multi-year contracts, but you're really, the sale begins on day one after the contract sold, because whether it's a year, 2 years, or 3 years, they're going to renew that contract. And depending on what type of technology you are, you may or may not be that sticky. Learning management, it wasn't sticky like ERP. It wasn't the backbone of the business. So you better make sure that you're taking care of your customers, truly have a customer first approach, and that you're delivering the value that you talked about, around value creation, realization, optimization throughout that life cycle. So to me, like I said, if I could summarize it, one would be just work ethic, namely on the sales side, and the innate characteristic of wanting to compete and win, showing up every day. And I think in the broader revenue engine is really being, hyper customer focused and making sure that you're taking care of your customers. You take care of them, they tend to take care of you.
For sure. I mean, those are all great points, all things I look for. Like, nothing really replaces work ethic, desire. It's how bad do you want it? That's such a key thing. And then the other thing too is, like, that's got to be paired with somebody who wants to be part of a team, who likes working in a team, especially I think in any environment, but especially as you get into more complex sales, more enterprise sales, it's really not an individual sport. You got to work with a lot of people successfully to deliver the customer outcomes. And in this SaaS world, like, you can go out and you can sell a subscription, but when you look at, your costs of acquisition, if that customer is not renewing and staying on the platform and happy, probably especially like in that spa hospitality world, it was such a small world, such a small community. Like, word travels fast, but word travels real fast in a small community. And when you're trying to build like that dominant franchise business in that category, you can't have sellers that are just going out there to get that initial 1 year deal. Like, that customer needs to renew for like 3 years or 5 years or a decade for you to be really successful.
Yeah, it's around contract value, right? But I think it's also around contract value for your customers. That's the main thing.
For sure. In terms of like onboarding and ramping new reps, like, you're going through this experience as a sales leader and revenue leader right now. How do you like to, you were sort of in that space at Docebo, with a platform that powered a lot of those activities. How do you like to onboard and ramp new reps, and how much of the playbook from there are you looking to port over to sort of copy paste into Toon Boom?
Yeah, obviously with Docebo, obviously being a learning management company, that was the bread and butter of the organization. So they had a very robust onboarding and, customer experience platform that we leveraged, very formal, obviously, and staged and so on. We're not quite at that level, but I do think there's certainly aspects. To me, I do like, you're going to take the standardization, you're going to, make it uniquely yours for sure, but you do have to have standardization, especially in an organization that is going to grow. If you don't have that solid foundation, then you're going to have problems downstream as that, company continues to grow and evolve. So I think, we've got a fairly robust onboarding and development program with the organization. I think there's some room for improvement because we're fortunate in some ways that we do have such a long-tenured team that we don't have the turnover that you normally see in SaaS. Even at the business development level, our inside sales team, average tenure there, I believe, is 3 to 5 years.
Which is amazing because you just don't see that on SDR teams. Like, normally, in a lot of cases, SDRs, they're fresh out of university or college. It's maybe even their first sales role. They definitely don't have that experience when it comes to sales, but probably even more importantly, when it comes to like the product and the industry knowledge. So that's super nice to have.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting because we're just, I guess it'll be a plug for Gong, but we're just implementing Gong. And, in certainly my last company where you had a lot of turnover like you normally do, especially at, kind of the IC levels, Gong was an incredible tool for coaching, for development, for standardization, all of those. I don't need to explain it. It will get a lot of value out of it at Toon Boom for sure, but it'll be a little bit different value because, like I said, we don't have that constant churn, and we've got very experienced and tenured folks right up and down the revenue chain, if you would. So we're fortunate that way, but there's always room for improvement, right?
For sure.
You look at your best golfers, tennis players, whatever, globally, playing ATP or on the PGA, and they've all got coaches and they've got folks that are looking at their swing and helping them improve. So we're going to implement the tools that are going to help us to continue to move that organization to the next level. And as we do grow and scale and bring new people in, then we can make sure that we're incorporating all the best practices and the things that make our A players successful into those that are onboarding right from day one.
Yeah, I mean, the best are always looking to get better. That's why they're the best. And cool thing with like tools like Gong, especially with the team that you have a great advantage of probably having a lot of great content to show new people to the org what great looks like. There's all that amazing, sort of tribal knowledge that's been accumulated for 5, 10, or 20 or 30 years in your case, which is, again, a super nice thing to have.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Perfect. Wanted to talk about, I know that you're still like relatively early in role. Wanted to talk about, any sort of current or upcoming roles that you're looking to hire for on the sales, marketing, go-to-market front.
Yeah, I think certainly now we've got some marketing positions that we're looking to fill this quarter. Again, our quarter runs through. We're in Q2. It runs through the end of February, and then I'm really looking now at FY27 planning. So where are the areas that we're going to invest and we're going to grow as we move into FY27, which for us starts at 1st of September. So I'm just getting the plan put in place now. I'm hoping to get that in front of a CEO and the board February, March timeframe, get the approvals that I need, and then really start to hire. And I would expect it's kind of the things we've discussed. We need to build that outbound motion on the inside sales. So I would expect that we're going to look at some SDR, BDR type resources, and also look at some additional sales capacity as we build out different segments in different regions. So I would expect there'll be more to follow, Sean. I would think probably April, May timeframe is when we'll probably have those recs posted and we'll get the hiring done so that we can get off the mark before the 1st of September. So we're already in stride for the coming year.
Okay. For those SDR roles, what kind of band of OTE are we talking about potentially for those roles? Where do you think that will land?
To be honest with you, I have not, we haven't assessed it. So I probably best not to throw out. I mean, we'd be competitive in industry, I would expect. We've been around 30 years. We got a very tenured team. So we haven't discussed it internally. So I think it might be a bit premature if I throw out numbers, but I would expect that we would be market competitive for sure.
Okay. So TBD, that makes sense. In terms of like background for these roles, like, it's going to be a net new role. That's going to be sort of the operative behind the role to get meetings and develop pipeline within net new accounts. Anything that stands out in terms of background that you'll be looking for when hiring for those roles?
It's interesting because it's a bit of an oxymoron because folks tend to look at, especially outbound inside sales, as being more of a junior role. To me, it's one of the toughest roles in a company. Inbound, there is a need. There's interest. There's you look at BANT, qualification, MedPick, whatever you want to utilize. There's already checks in the box because these folks have reached out to you. When you want to try and create interest and demand, that's a whole different skill and art, quite frankly. So to me, it really requires a very strong pedigree. Preferably would be folks that have sold in the SaaS industry, obviously, that have done outbound demand generation. that understand, value proposition, how to position, an elevator pitch effectively. And I think, to me, when I certainly, I've hired for a lot of roles where folks have just come into industry within the first 5 or so years. I like to look back and I like to understand extracurriculars. Did they participate in sports? Because to me, especially on the sales side, I believe it's very similar to sports. Again, it comes down to your individual contribution, but you're part of a broader team. And it's all about, understanding the plays, understanding the way that you're going to win, and getting out there and competing, day in, day out. So, and I also like to see folks that are self-starters, that put themselves through university, that had productive summer jobs versus, I won't get into but relying on other means, shall we say. So it's amazing. So many of the most successful entrepreneurs that I've worked with, that have built hundreds, if not billions of dollars, revenue organizations, they started, they had their own painting business in high school or university, or their own paving, business, et cetera, comes to mind. So, to meet people that are self-starters and, but again, that really have that desire to compete and win.
Okay, cool. So foundation is you're looking for somebody with SaaS experience, but in terms of just like their sort of the character side of the equation, if, they've got that background in not only competitive sports, but competitive team sports, because that team dynamic, the culture piece is really important. And then somebody who's like a self-starter, maybe a little bit entrepreneurial, like that's how I cut my teeth in high school. I started with cutting my parents' lawn and doing a little bit of landscaping, and got a couple neighbors, and I was like, this is kind of nice. And I started going door to door, even on my rollerblades, so I could hit up more doors. And I can tell you that experience was like foundational in terms of my career. And I think a big reason why, sort of developed a career in like outbound business to business sales. Like a lot of those lessons were learned from playing hockey, playing competitive hockey, and doing lawn maintenance and going door to door to get customers at the start of the season, so I could keep my calendar and my bank account full and pay for the lease that my parents had signed up for. I had to make those payments, otherwise I was in trouble.
Well, I've discussed a lot of things, and we will take it offline, but I also had my own lawn cutting business, and very similar to you, started with a couple of clients, and then I cut grass for the town, the ballpark, the parks, the cemetery, et cetera. And gosh, back in the 80s, I was making $20+ an hour, right? It was a pretty lucrative business. But I think that foundation is incredibly important, and it's something that you carry with you throughout your career.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of the light bulb for me. I could not that there's anything wrong with flipping burgers at McDonald's. I think there's some great lessons that can be learned there. There's nothing wrong with stocking shelves at the grocery store, but it sure was nice to be able to get cash in a lot of cases. Back then it was 25, 30, $50, depending on the size of the lawn and the type of work that you're doing, compared to, I think, minimum wage back then. I'm going to date myself. I think it was like $5, maybe $6 an hour. Yeah. Huge difference. It sure helped pay for a lot of expensive hockey gear.
Well, that's what I was going to say, and that was the other piece, Sean. I think and I always quip that being a goalie in hockey, certainly was probably the best practice for revenue leadership, because you're either the GOAT, you're carried off the ice on shoulders after a shutout or making some outstanding saves, or you're literally the GOAT. And, nobody's coming to congratulate you after the game, right? So again, a matter of putting in that hard work and making sure that, you're more on the greatest of all time side versus not performing the way that you or the team is required.
For sure. That's a great analogy, because, in the business side, other pieces are very important, but in a lot of cases, everything kind of like starts and stops with sales. Same thing in hockey. You can have a great forward group, a great defense group, but if you don't have a goalie who can stop the puck, you're not going to be winning too many games. It's such a important piece.
Absolutely.
For these SDRs that are coming into the organization, and for somebody who's kind of thinking a step or two ahead about what their career could look like, what kind of paths do you like to create for top performers in those SDR roles?
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that we did really well at Docebo, quite frankly. I think if you looked at most of the enterprise account executives, those that were kind of at the pinnacle of the IC, on the IC side, most of them had come up through the SDR ranks or the BDR ranks, and then became junior sales associates and then mid-market sales associate, mid-market account executives, I should say, and then into enterprise. So it's really, we're not at that size and scale yet. I'm expecting that, with our projections, we will be there in a few years. So it is creating that path, where you've got folks that can come in and they perform well for, 12 to 24 months in the BDR, whether it's inbound or outbound ranks. And then, moving into perhaps a mid-market account executive role or account management role. And then, continue to work through into the enterprise account executive side. And I think it's a bit of a misnomer. We talked a lot about this at Docebo, quite frankly. I think a lot of us are taught early on, if you want to be successful and you want to continue to grow, you've got to get into management. You got to get into management. But we really wanted to create a track for our top, individual contributors that they, could stay doing what they were doing best and what they loved and making a lot of money with a lot less headache, as we know, often is the case. But stay in that track and have that progression within that track. So you could certainly be, a senior individual in the company, someone that was well respected and whose opinions were, listened to and really mattered, but still not maybe move into that management side. So I think, I want to create something similar at Toon Boom, where you've got that growth trajectory and, a variety of roles and you can call the organization home. And like I said, even if for a small organization, we've got that, where we've got the 10, 15 year in folks in revenue and, they've started and they've managed different pieces of the business, right?
Yeah. In a lot of roles, like we mentioned, the average tenure of a CRO, it can be pretty short these days. So it's nice to have, to think about, like, when you're joining an organization, you can come in and there's long runway that's available to you. You go out and, you put up the points, you produce, you're a multiplier when it comes to the culture of the company. It's nice to know that you can progress. And I think that's something that, I don't know, I'd like to see a return of a little bit in terms of longer tenures in SaaS and software. I think that means a lot. Like, going back to my SAP experience, I started out in inside sales and progressed over the course of almost a decade there. And that experience was really formative. I went into different roles, started out in inside sales as a solution principal, and then moved into management and leadership. And, if you wanted to, SAP, there was a great track to get into, being a very, very high level individual contributor where you could make a lot of money, work with some amazing accounts. So that's great to hear that there's that same type of opportunity at Toon Boom.
Well, and I think especially, Sean, as you know, at SAP, I wasn't there as long as yourself, but as in the ecosystem, the goalposts of ERP continue, through acquisition. It was, and, I think a lot of companies are like that. We're a smaller organization, but we are certainly active in the M&A space. We've just rolled an organization in, and we are looking at adjacent technologies that make sense that we can fold into our platform, again, to offer a broader value proposition to our customers and garner more wallet share, if you would. So that's the interesting thing is, and I agree with you. There's the one thing in a private company. Working for PE, they've got growth projections and they've got high expectations as well. But I think there is a little bit more latitude where, we perhaps don't give everything away at the end of the quarter. And, there's more of a mid to long-term vantage point on how do we grow the business from a healthy perspective, both on top and bottom line. And, really grow and evolve strategically, if you would, versus, some of the things that you might see on more the public company side.
Yeah. Coming from that environment, like from the PE environment, there's a lot of discipline. It's not growth at all costs. So, there's maybe some downsides to that, but I saw in my experience a lot of upside to that, especially when I look at sort of the ZERP era of SaaS, where you had, companies really over hiring and doing things that really didn't make a lot of sense, especially in the public company space. Not that you didn't see that in the PE environment, but you certainly saw less of it. So yeah, for sure, a lot more discipline. It's been great, Greg. For our listeners, if you've been listening and thinking, especially in terms of this, SDR, BDR role, if you're, somebody who's got a great work ethic, tons of desire, you've maybe got, some entrepreneurial experience under your belt, and you've got some SaaS experience, and you'd like to learn more about the role when it's posted, you can go to my website at salesacademy.com/jobs and search for Toon Boom and apply there. I personally review all of the applications and I send the best candidates to Greg's team. Greg, this has been fantastic. It was great to catch up again. Wish you the best. You've had a ton of success throughout your career, and this sounds like an absolutely amazing opportunity, with you being an absolutely great fit for the role.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sean. Always great to connect, and hopefully some folks can get some tidbits out of this. And yeah, I've been blessed to work with some incredible people. I mean, to me, that's the thing. I'm the culmination of the team, and I've always been fortunate to have amazing people that I work with, that I help remove barriers and obstacles, and really help make them successful. That's my main goal and objective. And then perhaps myself and the company are successful as a byproduct. But always a pleasure chatting, and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, likewise, Greg. Have a great day.
You as well. Bye. Cheers.